Perseverance was the key word for the development of the Seventh-day Adventist Church during its formative years in the late 1800s to its organisation as the British Union in the year 1902. Perseverance was also the key word as the church began to find its place in an increasingly changing world from agriculturalism to the development of industrialisation in the early 1920s. Perseverance was also the key as the church faced 2 world wars and where those who were conscripted to war were tested in their core beliefs, especially the Sabbath. Yet despite these challenges, the church continued to grow in membership and structure, and after the First World War saw some of the largest evangelistic campaigns in Britain on a larger scale than ever before. At the BUC session in Watford Town Hall in 1950, the Union President, Pastor E.B. Rouge, discussed some of the difficulties that had become encountered during the past few years. He was extremely concerned that almost as many were apostatizing or dying as were being replaced by baptism. He felt the best solution was a much more aggressive evangelistic approach. And so, 2 years later, the British Isles was to experience the biggest evangelistic campaign ever to hit its shores. The General Conference sent one of their biggest and best evangelists from America, George E. Vanderman, who was an engaging and impressive speaker. He was assisted by all the ministers in the London area, as well as many other workers from throughout the country. 150,000 leaflets were printed and distributed. The Voice of Prophecy gave out 500,000 cards distributed by church members. And they chose one of the best venues in London, the Coliseum Theatre at Trafalgar Square in London. And the response was overwhelming. On Sunday, the 21st of September, 1953, 3 identical programs were held by Vanderman entitled "The Heavens Are Telling, What Do the Stars Say to You?" Nearly 10,000 people turned up. 1/3 of them couldn't even get a seat. When Vanderman's astrological approach gave way to a more traditional religious approach, the attendance began to drop. But still, over 2,500 people attended each week. And after 6 months of meetings, 73 people were baptized on the 22nd of March. Other baptisms followed, and whilst many of the new members joined one of the existing churches, eventually the Central London Church was organized in June, and by the end of the year, it had over 100 members. The General Conference had been keen to establish a permanent evangelistic centre in central London, and the place that was finally selected was this new gallery cinema right here in the heart of central London on Regent Street, with seating for over 1,400 people. The building was dedicated on Sabbath, the 24th of October in 1953, and the next day, Vanderman commenced a further series of meetings with 3,000 people attending over 4 identical programs. Vanderman not only set London's West End on fire with his evangelism and with his enthusiasm, but he also inspired a new generation of workers throughout the territory so that his influence was union-wide. One such pastor was Kenneth Lacey, who was successful in prior campaigns in Aberdeen and in Dundee, and continued his success after the Vanderman series in Brixton, in Birmingham, and in Manchester. By the BUC session of 1958, BUC President Pastor W.W. Armstrong gave an encouraging summary of the period between 1954 and 1957. The problem of a static membership was largely gone, for during the past 4 years, almost 1,000 had been added to the church, making a total of 8,252 members. The reasons for the remarkable growth were firstly the post-World War economy improvements, ending in the restrictions of rationing, ushering in a period of prosperity and full employment. There was also the 5-day week had become more common in industry, which catered for a more positive response to the Sabbath, where beforehand Sabbath observance was one of the main hindrances. Thirdly, with increased membership also saw increased tithes and offerings to help support the work. New and creative methods of evangelism, such as the Voice of Prophecy with its Bible correspondence course reaching thousands, health spots on Radio Luxembourg, Dial of Prayer in telephone services at Camp Hill Church led by Pastor Victor Bennyfield. There was the 5-day plan to stop smoking launched by Pastors Kinman and Pastors K. Elias. But over the next decade, perhaps the most significant impact on church membership growth and where its foundation of resilience would be truly tested was that of immigration. With a great need for manual labor and help to rebuild the country after the ravages of World War II, during the next 2 decades, over 250,000 came to England and made England their home. Many of those who came to England arrived from the islands, where the Seventh-day Adventist Church had a strong following. And whilst a majority of others from the Caribbean were nominal Christians, a far higher percentage of Seventh-day Adventists remain active in England than most other denominations. Soon, Caribbeans began to attend churches mainly in the larger cities in London, the Midlands, and in the industrial north. The following years saw change in the ethnic composition of the church. With much growth in the city areas where Caribbean members had settled, membership rapidly began to grow, and so by the end of the 1960s, the membership of the city churches consisted mainly of people who were originally from the Caribbean.
I think when they arrived here, first of all, there was a culture shock. They had to adjust to what they were seeing, different from what they heard back home and so forth. They had to adjust. And there were 2 adjustments, I think in my thinking, they had to make. There was adjustment in terms of work, because many came in and realized that once they got a job, they may have to work on a Sabbath. And that caused problems for some of them. And some of them were shaken by that experience. But the others who didn't have that to worry about getting into church, now they had to navigate their presence there in a different culture. And I think at first they took what I would describe as an observing posture. Many who came from the Caribbean, they were accustomed to being active in the evangelism, doing Bible studies and so forth. And so that energy now starts to resurface. They want to be involved, but they're not being allowed to be involved the way they experience involvement back in the Caribbean. So that's how they start to decide how I'm going to navigate the situation here.
At the turn of the 70s, there was a growing voice in these churches urging that the church should act to include members of similar background and experience to be full participants at all levels of church life, including the clergy. Out of this developed the Layman's Forum, which led in the debate, amongst other things, to deal with church representation amongst leadership.
And what they sought to do was to engage the church leadership in a discussion, presenting to the leadership the problem, getting them to consider that there's a problem. I think it was a very constructive way they went about it. They didn't go out and with banners and protesting at the conference office here or at the union office here or at the conference. They didn't do that. It was one of engaging them, making appointments to see the leaders, and putting the argument before the leaders that there need to be changes.
Founded on 23rd of November 1973, the purpose of the forum was fourfold. First, to organize more public evangelism, especially in the cities. Secondly, to set up church schools and to provide a youth center for London. Third, to provide more black pastors for inner city churches. And fourth, to racially integrate the church at all levels of its administrative structure. So what were the implications and the lessons of the change in membership? Looking back at the 1950s and 1960s, the following observations can be made. Primarily, it brought to the members of the church an increased awareness of the diversity of the church, yet also the need for unification. Having weathered the storms associated with church growth through evangelism and through immigration, the church has been challenged to re-establish its resilient and persevering nature that has been in existence from the very beginning. As the church moved into the future, these lessons would be tested again and again as it moved into the 21st century. Today, as the church moves forward, the consistent challenge as it plans to move into the future is to operate a strong and indivisible unit of integration that is founded upon mutual respect and acceptance. May the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the British Isles continue to be a church of resilience.